Thank you very much for that warm welcome. Can everyone hear me? The mic's working. Brilliant. I don't know how I'm going to follow Harry because he just sounds amazing, and I'm just sorry we can't see more of him in London. And that's the problem with amazing regional presenters, is that not everyone can get to watch them, get to have them as part of their lives. But so much of what he said is something that I try and apply to the journalist that I am constantly trying to be. That he's not dispassionate. You can see that he's involved. He does sometimes get involved, and he's not afraid of getting involved. And I'm constantly trying to be, and I hope I am, being that type of journalist. And I think that's something that you need to decide, whether you are that angry journalist. That's fine, because then you're a campaigning journalist. Or what is motivating you to be in this profession. But I think this is probably a good time for me to say that journalism wasn't something that I always wanted to do. When I was younger, that wasn't really part of the plan. I actually wanted to be Janet Jackson's backing dancer. Dancing is all I ever knew when I was younger, and I genuinely thought, this wasn't a weird dream, I genuinely thought I could do it at one point. And the backup plan for being Janet Jackson's backing dancer was to be a doctor. I just really loved biology at school, and I chose for my A-levels biology, chemistry and psychology in the hope of applying to medicine, until my mum one day turned around and said, "Beta, why do you want to be," she doesn't really have an accent, but it just sounds better when I say it like that. "Why do you want to be a doctor? Everyone's a doctor." And she genuinely just thought I was mad wanting to do medicine. So probably the opposite of so many mothers out there who have this aspiration of their child being a doctor. She just said, everyone's a doctor. We've got so many in the family, and she's right. We have a lot of doctors in the family. She herself is a midwife. My dad is a pharmacist, and by the way, they met at Bradford Uni, so I'm sort of a product of Yorkshire, I guess. Everyone loves to have that connection to Yorkshire, don't they? But she said, try something different. And at the time, as well as doing lots of extra work, so I used to be an extra on EastEnders and an extra on The Bill and programs like that to sort of fund, I was saving up for university, because at the time, you used to get paid £50 a day to sit and read all day and then just pop into the back of the Queen Vic and just sit there having a pretend drink. And £50 a day in 1997 was a massive amount. I don't know how much extras get paid now. So that's how I used to save up money, and I was making a quite good living from that. And so I was also volunteering, because my school really encouraged everyone to volunteer. And I was volunteering at a hospital radio station. Now my thinking was, A, I'm volunteering, so that's a nice thing to do, but B, I'll get something out of that. I'm in a hospital environment and I want to be a doctor. The same thinking for doing Latin as a GCSE. I thought, oh yes, that will help me with body part names. So you can see how my mind works. So I was volunteering at a hospital radio station, which involved going around the cancer wards, taking requests from the patients and then playing them out over an hour. And my mum had said, think about something else. And I thought, well, I quite enjoy being on the radio, being myself on the radio. Maybe I should try journalism. So I applied to a few journalism courses and ended up getting on a course at Nottingham Trent University at their broadcast school. You needed 26 points. I don't know whether the point system still exists, but you needed 26 points at the time to get on. So it was quite a hard course to get onto. Got on there, and then I started journalism, and the rest, as they say, is history. So yes, I still watch Grey's Anatomy and think, what could have been, but absolutely no regrets. And I did get to be a backing dancer. It was on Goodness Gracious Me as part of the extra work for a fake Bollywood character called Chunky Lafunga. So it's not really quite Janet Jackson, but I did get to be a backing dancer. And on a Kula Shaker video. You guys won't know who Kula Shaker is, will you? Will you? Oh, right. Oh. Yeah, well, you would know. I was going to say, otherwise ask your aunts or your mums. That's what I used to say to the Newsround kids, but they didn't know who people were. So yeah, if you go on YouTube, there's about 0.4 seconds of me on a Kula Shaker video. And of course, I got to dance for Comic Relief. So I've been able to fulfill those, original dreams somehow. So I did my undergraduate degree at Nottingham Trent University. While I was there, I did work experience at Heart FM, which I think is called GEM now. 3 weeks on there, and I also worked at 5 News, and both of those really gave me a taste of what it would be like in the industry. And as soon as I left university, before I left actually, I ended up getting a job at a local radio station in London. It was an Asian radio station called Sunrise Radio, and I was their breakfast news presenter. A great place to start because I was instantly doing a job that I wanted to do. I didn't know at the time whether I wanted to be a presenter, but it was sort of instantly I was a presenter, so it was quite nice. But it was a very, very difficult place to work. It was a 6-day-a-week job or not very much money at all. And I sort of very quickly, about 3-4 months in, thought I need to move. And the reason being is they asked me to start voicing up adverts on the radio station. It's a commercial radio station. And they asked me to start voicing up adverts. And I kind of felt like, it was very timely at the moment with all this Telegraph allegations going on, but I felt that if a news presenter is voicing up adverts on the same radio station that they're reading out the news on, how will you know what to trust from that person? I just didn't feel that added up. And I had a word with the editor who just said, well, everyone else is doing it. And so we had this disagreement. I stood my ground and I did not voice up any adverts. It wasn't about money, or I mean, they weren't offering to pay. And I said, well, if I am going to voice up an advert, I want money for it. But I just felt like you don't want to be hearing the news 1 minute and then the advert in between the news and the weather, it's my voice again because it's going to sound like the news. And so over that disagreement, I started looking for other jobs. They didn't kick me out, or I didn't leave, we left on amicable terms, but I just felt that the one thing I never wanted to do over my career was lose the trust of my audience. You can accuse me of a lot of things, but I always wanted to be trustworthy, and I think that's really important in everything that you do, that you retain integrity. You have to be happy with what you're doing, even if someone else is trying to pressure you into doing something else. And actually, had I listened to them, I would have probably gone up in that organisation a bit more. I would have got more money. It would have been better for my career in that radio station, but my gut said no, absolutely not, don't voice up those adverts. And so it encouraged me to look for a job elsewhere, and I saw an advert for a producer at the BBC World Service. So the radio station, people often confuse BBC World and the BBC World Service. So the BBC World Service is the radio station. And I saw an advert for a producer there, and I went for an interview and ended up getting the job. It was on a program called World Business Report, and I ended up getting that job, but on a casual basis for 3 days. But 3 days there paid more than the 6 days at Sunrise Radio, so I immediately moved. So 5 months into my first job, I moved, which was quite risky because I didn't want to look like that type of person that quickly moved from job to job either. But I thought, the BBC is where I want to be. And once you get your foot in the door at the BBC, it opens up so many other doors because you suddenly have access to so many people on internal email and the networking opportunities are amazing. And I was quite into business news. I've grown up around family businesses. I wasn't intimidated talking about business or explaining business to a general audience. And so that seemed like a great place for me. And I only ended up back on air, and again, I was really enjoying producing programs. I only ended up back on air when someone went off sick. So they said, oh, we know you've presented before. Do you fancy presenting the program tonight? I said, okay, fine. And so I ended up presenting and producing there. And so everything's happened a little bit accidentally. And they have a breakfast show at the BBC World Service called The World Today, which also had an opening, and I wanted to fill it. I was only working 3 days a week, so I wanted to fill the gaps. And so I went there, and they asked me to present there as well. And so I started presenting quite early, these big 2-hour shows, probably earlier than I should have in a way, at the BBC World Service at the age of about 23. I was presenting these huge shows, which I was finding I kept thinking someone's going to discover that I'm here and I'm not meant to be here. But these things happen accidentally. Now, I was always on a casual contract, and I wanted to try and get a staff contract at the BBC. That was the ultimate aim 10 years ago for everyone. Everyone wanted a staff contract at the BBC. So there was a job going on The World Today as a producer of the programme I was presenting. And I thought, well, I'm presenting it, so that would be a great thing for me to go to. Of course, I can produce the programme I'm presenting. Went for the board, and the BBC have boards. Again, I'm not sure if they still have boards, but the BBC interview process is called a board, where they have a panel of 3 people who interview you, and then you have to do other tests like copywriting and maybe a piece to camera and a screen test as well. And I went through the interview process and then didn't get the job. So I actually went back to them and said, but I'm already producing the show. I'm also presenting the show that I've just gone for the job of producing on. How did I not get this? And they said, well, because there were other candidates better than you. But I still carried on producing it and presenting it. And then I quickly realized that sometimes at the BBC you have to go through, there's almost a bit of politics involved where you have to kind of go through 3 sets of boards before you get a job, because there are other people who've already gone through a few boards before they've got the job. So my advice based on that experience is just don't get disheartened, because it sounds ridiculous not to get the job of producing the show that I'm presenting, but I genuinely didn't. And I didn't let it bruise my ego or anything like that. And I just kind of thought, well, actually, I quickly realized sometimes you've just got to be humble and just jump through a few hoops, because that's the reality. It might not be fair, but that's just life. And so, yes, I carried on presenting and producing across World Business Report and the World Today. And the only reason I left the BBC World Service, because it is truly an amazing place to work. The level of journalism there, you don't get as much national attention in this country, but the BBC World Service is listened to by 50 million people around the world. The level of journalism there, it is almost unmatched anywhere else. And it was such a great privilege to work there. And the only reason I left is because someone from the domestic business unit was launching a show on 5 Live. It was Bob Shannon was in charge of 5 Live at the time. And he was the channel controller, and he wanted to launch a weekend business show with the business editor at the time called Jeff Randall, who subsequently went on to be editor-at-large at The Telegraph and then presented programmes at Sky. And he wanted someone to help be part of that team to launch that. And I thought that was a great opportunity, because I was quite a fan of the way Jeff Randall presented business news. At the time, it was quite usual for business news to be sort of quite anti-business, very consumer, big business is bad, and not really explaining to an audience how not all business is bad. When businesses are doing well, employment generally is better and the economy is doing well, and sort of explaining that side of business. So I went over to domestic news to help launch this show called Weekend Business. And it was a surreal show to work on, because every Sunday night it would be an empty kind of studio environment. Most people had gone home, and at 8 o'clock we'd have this green room full of these big bosses, the boss of British Airways or W.H. Smith, or even people like the woman who turned around Topshop 10-15 years ago, Jane Shepherdson. One day we had Elle Macpherson in this tiny little green room. We'd persuaded her on the way home from skiing to go straight from her private jet to us in the studio, all her skin peeling everywhere, to talk to us about her business interests. And it was a really surreal show to work on, and we got nominated for a Sony Radio Award. And the only reason I left that is because someone called the business unit and said, we need someone young who knows about business. It was someone from CBBC. They were launching a show called Beat the Boss, which was their version of The Apprentice. And they were launching the show, and they just, literally all they wanted was someone young who knew about business. So I was like sitting opposite the person who happened to answer the phone, and they said, Sonali, you're young, you know about business. Fancy sending something over to CBBC? Now, I'd not done telly at that point. I'd done something called BBC Interactive, which is where you operate the auto cue yourself, but not with a foot pedal, but with a hand pedal. So I would be presenting these things, which is a red button service, and you could see my arm doing this as I'm winding up the auto cue. It's just a ridiculous, and I have burnt those tapes because I was so bad at it. And then you've got my arm doing this, so it looks like I'm winding myself up just to get going on this show. So I think Lewis Hamilton, who was racing for Formula 3 at the time, had won something on Formula 3. And I just walked down a street in Shepherd's Bush and just recorded 20 seconds of me talking to camera about Lewis Hamilton. Sent that over, got shortlisted for a screen test. The night before my screen test, though, they called me up and said, we're really sorry, but we no longer can have you in for a screen test because we've hired someone called Saira Khan, who at the time had been a runner-up on The Apprentice. Saira Khan, I think, now does something on Channel 5, some money-saving show. You're all looking blank at me. I promise you she was a big name, and I was no name. I basically got told, you're not a name, we can't hire you, she's a name, which was always lovely to hear. But they said, as a consolation, Newsround is looking for a presenter. How do you fancy sending your showreel there, my showreel being this 20 seconds, and going for a screen test there? And so a few weeks later, I got offered the job at Newsround. Now, I was on a path to being a financial journalist, loving this path, really enjoying being a financial journalist, loved explaining business news to a general audience, and saw myself continuing there and continuing a career and trying to make it as a bit of a business journalist name. But I then thought, and I had just accepted a job actually on News 24, it was called News 24 at the time, it's the BBC News channel now, to be their weekend business reporter. And the day after, I got offered this Newsround job. And I sat down and I thought, well, that's going to take me off my path, but I'm not always going to look young enough to work on Newsround. So maybe I should go to Newsround, see what happens there, and then maybe pick up the business journalism later on. So I went across to Newsround, but to go to Newsround, I had to take quite a pay cut, and I had to go down in bands. The BBC have sort of bands of journalism in terms of your level of experience and pay. It reflects that. And I had been band 8-9, a senior broadcast journalist, and had to come down to broadcast journalism level to work at Newsround. So it was a lifestyle change as well, but I felt that a show like Newsround was something you can't really turn down, and I'm so glad I didn't turn it down, because I think it will be the best place actually that I've ever worked, and I think it'll be some of the hardest journalism that I will have ever had to write and present. Because if you can explain the economy, for example, to a 9-year-old, you can explain it to anyone. And I've had a bit of snobbery over the years about being a journalist for CBBC, because people assume that if you are telling the news to a 9-year-old, you are a 9-year-old, which is just completely ridiculous. It is harder to write for a 9-year-old than it is for a broadsheet paper, for example, because you can hide behind words and you don't have to fully understand a story, I think, to write for adults. But you absolutely must know the story inside out to be able to explain it to a 9-year-old. So if you ever get the opportunity to work for a tabloid or work for a children's journalism outfit, I would recommend that, because it sharpens up your writing and sharpens up your reporting skills like nothing else will, because you absolutely need to know the story. And that's what people do. Certain journalists realise that, but other journalists will have a little bit of, they'll look down on children's news. And if you ever get that opportunity, I would say don't turn it down. I got to go to Haiti after the earthquake there to do documentaries. I went to China for the Olympic Games. I went to, on that same trip in China, I did a documentary about life after the earthquake there, where hundreds of people had died. I got to go to Afghanistan. I wasn't embedded with the troops like Harry was. We went to Kabul to do 2 documentaries about what it's like for children to grow up in a war zone, because these children who are 10, 11 had never known a country, a city without war going on around them. So it was quite scary going to Kabul, because the way that BBC News journalists go are in Kabul, there's a bureau there, is that they try and mingle in with the locals, the way they dress. They have really banged up cars. They don't want to be conspicuous. You don't want to draw attention to yourself, because there is a risk of kidnapping, and even more so nowadays, I guess. My old editor at The World Today, at the World Service, was Alan Johnston, who got kidnapped in Gaza. It is something that actually does happen. Yes, it's rare, but it's something that does happen. As my preparation for Afghanistan, not only do you have to go on a hostile environment course, where I won't tell you the full details of the course, because many of you will go onto this course, and I think it's better to not know too many details about it to get the most out of it. But part of your training to go to a hostile environment is having to answer questions, those questions that your organisation, so the BBC, might ask your kidnappers to check if you're still alive. So I had to tell my brother the answers to those questions. I chose my brother as my point of contact, not my husband or not my parents, because I didn't want to worry them. I chose my brother and I gave him the answers. So only he and me knew the answers to these questions, so that the BBC could contact my brother and say, what are the answers, so that they could check if I was still alive. We stayed in a hotel called the Serena Hotel, which is sort of doubly reinforced. It's the only hotel that CBBC would approve us staying in. But unlike the other BBC journalists that were going out there, CBBC felt that they wanted to take more precautions. So they sent us out there with 2 ex-Foreign Legion bodyguards, basically. And we were travelling around in an armoured vehicle, which I can understand their thinking, and I really appreciate the fact that they wanted to keep us safe. But it's only when I got out there I realised how conspicuous we were. And probably, I don't know if we were more of a target, but we certainly got a lot of stares. Because, you know, you're in this armoured vehicle, and with 2 bodyguards with guns, and it was hard travelling around Afghanistan like that, but that's the only way CBBC would allow us to be out there, and that's the only way they would give approval for us to do these documentaries, so we went and we did it. When we got back, CBBC asked me to go again to Afghanistan 2 months later, but this time embedded with the troops in Camp Bastion. And I saw what I'd put my family through just to go once, and I said no. I think career-wise, that many people would say, why would you say no to going again? I really wanted to go, by the way, again. But I felt like sometimes you have to put life first, and I'd seen what my family had gone through by me going out there once. If the request had been in 6 months' time or a year's time, I probably would have gone again. But I thought 2 months later, to put my family through that, this time I'm going to have to make a decision for my family and not for me. And so I did that. And that's what I've tried to do in my career too. And I would advise this as well, that don't be afraid to sometimes put life and family first if you feel that's what you want to do, because at least you won't have regrets. I think if you want to put your career first, absolutely do, but things will kind of work out as long as you do the right thing for you, because then you won't feel like you've missed out on anything. And I don't regret ever putting family first and not doing that second trip to Afghanistan. Now, I had a fabulous 5 years at Newsround, and the only reason I left Newsround, and I keep saying this because I've never wanted to leave the jobs I've been in, and the only reason I've ever left the job is because another opportunity has come up. The reason I left Newsround actually though was because the BBC was moving a lot of departments up to Salford, and I was a Londoner. I was born in London, my parents live in London, my husband's in London, my in-laws are in London. I had no choice, I didn't have a choice to move. So when they gave me that letter to say the BBC's moving, instantly I just replied, I can't. I had no choice. I didn't want a long distance relationship, I didn't want to see my parents once every 4 months or whatever. I wanted to retain my family life. So I, again, made a decision for the family. And I don't regret that either, because as it turns out, being a freelance presenter is quite a good thing. So I left the BBC, gave up my staff job. And what was great, around the time when all the Salford stuff was happening, BBC Sport came to me. They had noticed me out in Beijing. I'd done the Beijing Games for CBBC, and they had noticed me out there, and they said, would you consider doing some more work for us? Well, what an amazing request. So I said, absolutely, send me somewhere. They said, would you go on the news channel and just do our sports bulletins? I said, I don't fancy that, because I'd rather carry on with my Newsround day job, because I knew the opportunities I was getting at Newsround. I said, but if you send me to an event, I would love to work with you. They offered to send me to Delhi for the Commonwealth Games, which was amazing. So I went to Delhi. After that, I went to Sri Lanka for the Cricket World Cup for them to do their highlights programs out of Sri Lanka. So I started this relationship with BBC Sport, and I could see that my staff contract was coming to an end because of Salford, and I thought, well, actually, the London Games is round the corner. Maybe that's my way to transition back to adult news out of children's news. So I found a champion at BBC Sport, a man called Dave Gordon, who used to be the head of events there, and he noticed that the way CBBC trains up their journalists, you know how to do everything. I can avid edit. I know how to operate a camera. You learn how to do everything at CBBC. They don't have the money for lots of separate jobs. So because of that, he recognized the talent pool that there is in CBBC. So he started championing a few people, and I started this relationship with BBC Sport. Presented a show called British Olympic Dreams, actually coincidentally with my co-presenter on Newsround. So we both sort of started this move out of Newsround together, and got to be part of the London Games, which, just like Harry and the Tour de France, that was what London 2012 felt like for me. This was my home city. There was never going to be an Olympic Games in my home city again in my lifetime, I didn't think. So this was my chance. I said, I don't care if I never go to another Olympic Games. I had an amazing time in Beijing. I want to replicate that in London. And it exceeded all my expectations. I was employed to do a 5-hour daily show on BBC Three, which was mad because there was no auto cue, no sub-editor, nothing. You're just kind of flying by the seat of your pants. It was a bit crazy and a bit of a brutal training ground for sports broadcasting. And to this day, I still will never call myself a sports journalist. I'm a presenter who's a massive sports fan that found her way into presenting sport. I never thought about sports broadcasting when I was younger. I was just a sports fan. I just watched sport. But it was great that someone at BBC Sport recognised that it's okay to have people on the team like that too, who are just sports fans and have the ability to be the person at home. That's how I interview in sport. I'm just the fan at home. What would I want to ask this person about the next match? Or what would I like to, I'm just nosy. And that's the way I approach sport broadcasting, and which I currently do for the Today programme. Before Glasgow 2014, the editor at the Today programme, who knew me from my Newsround days, said, would you consider presenting some sport for us? You don't really turn down the Today programme. And so I started that relationship just before the Glasgow Games and have been doing that. I fill in maybe once or twice a week. And it's an intimidating show to be part of, but at the same time, it's a brilliant audience because there's like 3 million people that listen to the Today programme. And you get some great names, and it's not a destination place for sport for people, but it is a great place, a great team to be part of. And so at the moment, I do the sport on the Today programme, and that's the majority of the sport broadcasting I do. For the last 3 years, I've been doing the highlights for the triathlon for BBC Sport. And BBC Sport gave me some amazing opportunities. I did Wimbledon for them, I did the boat race, I did the London Marathon. I got to be part of those big events for the BBC. I love doing events. I love being part of what everyone is talking about. And that's what I was telling Jan about, that I will be part of the big reburial processions for Richard III for Channel 4. I present the Lord Mayor show for the BBC. I just like being part of those events. When I left Newsround, I made a conscious decision to leave what they consider news. And because at Newsround, I learned how to present news, but with a bit of a personality or with a heart almost. And it was very hard to see myself going back to being a dispassionate, impartial news presenter. That's not to say I'm not professional, but I would really echo Harry's sentiments when he says, sometimes you can add that little bit more in and you can almost cross the line and it's okay. You'll know when it's right, when it feels better to have a bit of heart in that story and when you need to completely step back. And you can always decide the type of presenter that you want to be. When I left Newsround and while I was doing all that sport broadcasting, I did want to make sure that I did other things too. And I knocked on a lot of doors. I had a lot of meetings and tried to cultivate a lot of contacts. And a lot of people would say, what we don't want to do is lose you to another channel. We don't want to, that's what tended to happen at the BBC, that the kind of Holly Willoughbys, Fern Cottons of the world would end up going to ITV because they fell in a gap at the BBC. And the feedback I used to get often is that, you look quite young though, you look quite young. Maybe you won't be quite right, you need to wait a few years, you look quite young. I'm 34 at the moment, by the way. But people assume that because I talk to children that I was similar in it, and because I have long hair, or because I'm only 5'1" on a tall day, 5'3" with these on. It was hard. It was really hard to try and get people to trust me after presenting children's news. They kept forgetting that we had more adults watching us on BBC One for Newsround than kids ever watched us. They only really ever watched us on CBBC. Most of the audience on BBC One was always adults or students at 5 o'clock on BBC One. Unfortunately, Newsround isn't on BBC One anymore. But that's when a contact and nurturing those contacts came in, what Harry was talking about. My ex-channel head at CBBC ended up becoming the controller of daytime. Went in to have a meeting with him. Very soon I started working on Escape to the Country, which is a property show at 3 o'clock on BBC One. Again, a lot of students watch that. It's a guilty pleasure. The Twitter feeds are amazing about it. Can't believe I'm sitting here watching Escape to the Country at 3 o'clock. What has my life come to? I now present that show. I absolutely love it because I'm so nosy. I love property. It's a personal passion of mine. And now I get to just nose around people's property and show people around. So it's something I absolutely love to do. It's taken me away slightly from the journalism that, you know, I was on this path again, I'll say it again, to becoming a financial journalist. But sometimes what my advice to you would be, it's okay if you think the opportunity is right. It's okay. You never know. I didn't know when I was 20 and leaving university that I would become a Newsround presenter or I'd end up covering the Olympic Games. I never thought about sports broadcasting or broadcasting for CBBC, but that's where things have led me to. And so it's kind of okay to go off your path. Who knows? Maybe I'll one day want to go back on that path to being a shit-hot financial journalist. I don't know. I've left it for many years, so I'm not sure I'll ever be able to do well in it. But I love the eclectic mix of programming I now do, and I wouldn't have it really any other way. The one thing over the past few years that a lot of people have asked me, past only maybe 1 to 2 years, people have asked me to talk about, is diversity in the media. Now, I never thought about it when I decided to become a journalist. I used to see this woman called Gargi Patel reading the news when I was younger, and maybe that's why I never thought about it, because I saw a representation of myself on the telly, so I didn't think it wasn't possible. Maybe that's why, I don't know. I did come up against, when I told my wider community that I was going to university to do journalism and not medicine, a lot of people did say, why did you fail your A-levels? There was a misunderstanding of it. I got 3 A's, by the way, but there was a misunderstanding of it in my community because people assumed that wasn't really a career for you, but not from my immediate family, and I never thought about it, and I never thought it wasn't possible. But lately, I guess a lot of people have been talking about it and asking me about it, and what I would say is that I think news is probably at the forefront in all types of media when it comes to diversity, especially on screen. And I think we should give news credit for that. You probably see more diversity in news than you do any other parts of the media. And actually, in front of the camera is sort of the easiest way to show people that you're trying to make changes. So you can understand why it's there first. And I definitely think news have been pioneers in that. But where I do think it needs to be improved is at every other level in broadcasting. So from runner, researcher, right up through the food chain, up to editor level and channel head level, because that's where I don't always see it. Again, in news behind the camera, I do see it a bit more than in, for example, sports media. But it needs to happen, and it needs to happen because if it doesn't happen, we will continue to have a very narrow range of stories being broadcast. So it's not about the people who broadcast, it's also about the story choice that people use. If you don't have people at every level of different minorities, whether that be a disabled person or a woman or a brown person or whatever other minority you want to talk about, if you don't have people at every level, it's not really doing the job, because people who are in the same minority, this isn't always the case, but have a natural tendency to also champion each other, and that's what you sometimes need, what people might refer to as nepotism or whatever. You sometimes need a bit of that, because you've got the old white boys club and you need to start having other clubs, or it'll end up being quite cliquey. And I have found that there are a lot of cliques in the media, and people don't get it. Those comments about me looking young, if there had been someone of colour who was a bit more diverse, maybe they wouldn't have said that to me, because they understand, well, scientifically I'm going to probably look younger than a 34-year-old white woman my age, because I've got more melanin in my skin, and so it weathers the sun a bit better. I mean, that's a scientific fact. But I also look probably a bit younger because I have long hair. But I used to always be told you need to cut your hair into a news bob, otherwise people won't trust you, because apparently if you have long hair, you're not as trustworthy, because you're not as clever, because you're more interested in your appearance than you know, that's the implication. Now, things have completely changed. This was 10 years ago people used to say that to me, but who knows what kind of biases people have in their heads. But if you have people of diversity at every level interviewing you, maybe they won't think I look young. I got into a row with a sports producer. I knew this athlete very, very well, had been following him for years, had been interviewing him for years. And he had just lost a race that he really, really, really wanted to win. My first question to him was, and I won't say his name and I won't say which producer it is, let's, for example, say his name was Anthony. I said, Anthony, you must be absolutely gutted. And I said that first because I knew that's how he'd be feeling. And there was no point asking any other question because he will have just been shattered. He still had got a silver or bronze, I can't even remember, but that would have meant nothing to him. We could have moved on to that afterwards, but to him, he had lost. He might as well have come last, he had lost. After the interview, my producer turned around to me and said, you really shouldn't have used the word gutted. And I said, why not? She goes, my mother would not have liked that word. It's not a very becoming word. I said, why? That's how he felt. Well, gutted just evokes images of, you gutting a fish. And I said, I'm a vegetarian, I don't know about gutting a fish, I never tried fish in my life. But my mother wouldn't have thought that. My mother, who speaks, English might be her second language. English, by the way, is my second language. She wouldn't have thought that. She would have just thought, how disappointed is this athlete? So why is your mother more important than my mother? But apparently it was. But if you have people, now, I'm not saying if she'd been a brown producer, she would have thought any differently, but I'm just giving you that ridiculous example because it is a ridiculous example. This is how I speak. Not everyone is going to like the word gutted, but some people say that. I don't say it because I'm brown, I don't say it because I'm a Northwest Londoner, I don't say it because I'm 34, I just say it because it's a natural word for me to say it. Incidentally, that's the word that he subsequently used in other interviews anyway, but I got told off. And so when I went and talked about it to the person, her line manager, just out of interest, I sort of, over a coffee, I said, gosh, I got into this weird argument the other day about using the word gutted. He agreed with her. He said, no, that's not a great word to use because not everyone in the general UK population would like that word. It's a bit severe. I couldn't believe my ears because if you want to employ people who look different, who are of different ages, different ethnicities, different abilities, you have to accept that people have different ways of describing things, and that's okay sometimes. Okay, your mother might have been offended, but my mother might have understood that better, and isn't that what we're trying to do, is make sure that our programming is for different types of people, not just that one type of person that is your prim and proper mother. I've also been told that I'm too much of a Londoner because the trend has been for regional accents, which is the opposite of what Harry was told. Northwest London is a boring kind of middle of the road accent apparently. So I don't have, so sometimes I'm too diverse and sometimes I'm not diverse enough. So in a way, you can never win. So my policy is be myself, and if people want to hire you, they will, and if they don't, they don't, because it's hard to change everyone, but if I'm myself, then at least I'll never get found out, because I am myself, so I can be no different. But you can always, you retain that integrity that I started off talking about. I'm always going to be myself, and if you want to, I'll always adapt to my broadcasting. So if I'm on Newsround, of course I'm going to be different slightly than I am on the Today programme, but fundamentally I'm the same journalist, and I'm not going to be more patronising on Newsround, or, I'm not going to patronise my audience on either of those things. So I just kind of try and stay me, and if people aren't happy about it, and I still use the word gutted, by the way, because I don't, not out of defiance, but I just think people speak differently and people need to learn, and sometimes you just got to be a bit defiant about these little things because it sends out a message. I'm not trying to be, I was talking to Jan about before I came up here that it's difficult as a woman of colour to talk about diversity in the media because often you can come across as being angry brown woman, which no one wants to be, but I think it's important for me to talk about it for future generations, and that's why I do agree to talk about it. Overall, I've had a brilliant experience, and I've got to, I love my career, and I love the eclectic mix of things I do, and I love the fact that I'm doing it while also raising a daughter. But the reason why I talk about diversity is because I am raising a daughter, and I think that's a huge responsibility, and I owe it to her to make sure that she doesn't have those kind of struggles that perhaps me and my peers are having whether we know it or not, but sometimes you can just sense that, things would have been easier had I been a white guy. But yeah, she's 16 months old, by the way. She's called Ariana, and she's not allowed to watch any Peppa Pig, only live sport. So it means she cheers for every goal that Arsenal put at the back of the net, which isn't very often, unfortunately. Any questions? No, I can go to London.
Do you think that, have you seen in the last 10 years a change in diversity and a change in the way that things are happening, or do you still think it's quite a big hill to climb?
It's a tough question for me to answer because as I said, I never thought about it 10 years ago and no one was asking about it 10 years ago. I really never thought, okay, I'm a brown person, I need to be on the telly to show the world that we can do this too. I genuinely never thought that. And it's only in the last couple of years that people have been thinking that. So I honestly don't know. I think in front of the camera there's definitely lots of people. Well, I've spoken to different communities about this. I went to a diversity conference a few months ago. The statistics on I think there was one black reporter out for a national paper at the World Cup in Brazil. Now that's ridiculous, that's not representing. So I think the black community have a different view on it from, for example, the Asian community, but then you can start going down within community. I just think we need to see more of everyone on screen and a true reflection of everyone on screen in every way. But we've got to make sure that we don't just chuck people there because they are of a certain colour, because then you're doing that community a disservice. So you've got to make sure that if you do decide to put someone on screen or behind the camera or at editor level, that they have the ability. And the only way you can do that is by starting at runner level and making sure you're nurturing people at every level, not to just bring someone in at editor level to show the world that we are trying to be diverse. You're just doing the community a disservice, and you're doing, most importantly, your audience a disservice. And the audience is the most important thing, surely, at the end of the day. So it's got to be done in the right way, and I know Lenny Henry has been doing so much about, I think he believes that quotas are the only way, because he's been banging on about it for years, and those are his words, not mine. And he's frustrated, and he says, well, maybe we need quotas now because that's the only way we're going to tackle this problem. I don't know about quotas or not. I don't know. I don't know if I've ever got a job because of my colour or not, or because I'm a woman, or, I don't know. I don't know, and I can't answer that. No one's ever said that to me. I don't know. If it has been, well, I won't have retained that job if I wasn't good at it, I would hope. But then we all know bad people are hired too, and that is a frustration of this industry, and you're going to have to learn to deal with it. That sometimes you'll see someone operating a camera or editing a program that is not as good as you, but that's just life, and just prove yourself, and I think eventually you'll get there. I hope that answers your question, sorry.
Just picking up that point, you said it might have been easier if you'd been a white guy. Which of those two is the biggest obstacle?
I don't know, because I genuinely have not felt direct obstacles because of who I am. It's just little feelings you get, like, for example, you're hired and then you're told to speak a different way, and I don't, English might not be my first language, but I don't feel that I speak badly as a journalist, so I don't know, but in sports broadcasting there is a bit of a clique about being, well, the whole woman issue in sports broadcasting, that's a tough one. When I used to present Match of the Day Kickabout for CBBC, they used to ask us to do women's football, and this was quite early on, this was like 3-4 years ago. But we were the only place that were asked to do women's football, and I said, I don't think we should be the only place. I wasn't saying no to covering women's football. What I was saying no to is CBBC being the only home for women's football, because children would have just turned to Football Focus. Children still want to see the things they want to see, and primarily that would be the Premier League. Whether they have a team at a lower league level, generally most kids nowadays also have a Premier League team. And what I didn't want to do is drive kids away from CBBC to just so they watch Football Focus, because that's where they got their Premier League fix from. I didn't want women's football to become token on CBBC. I said to them, if it's on Football Focus, if it's on Match of the Day, if it's on other programming, then CBBC should do it, because CBBC should be as aspirational educational as other programs. And I don't want kids to feel like we are patronising them or babying them by shoving women's football on CBBC. So I was quite strong about not doing that. And I'm quite adamant also about, I cover women's sports, and I do make sure that I integrate women's sports into my Radio 4 bulletin where it deserves to be integrated. Absolutely. And I don't always do men's rugby and then women's rugby at the end. Actually, I'll do it in the merit of results. So if the result was last night, I'll give the women's result first and then the men's match. Looking ahead to today, the men's side. So I don't always start with the men. That's not because I'm trying to reverse the trend either. I'm not trying to it's not a quota thing either. But it's just, you need to start integrating women's sport into sport bulletins so it's just sport, so it's not women's sport. So in that way, I don't want to be a woman in sports broadcasting who only covers women's sport, in the same way that I don't think a black reporter on a national programme should only cover the community issues. That's where we're going wrong if we do that, and I often see that you end up becoming the reporter for black issues. That's why I've never really thought about the Asian network. That's not to say I wouldn't love to work on it someday in the future, but what I was quite conscious of doing is not only talking about community issues, because I myself have only ever listened to what they call mainstream media, 5 Live or Radio 4. So why shouldn't there be stories there for me? And I don't only really want stories about Asian people. I just want stories because it's about 30-something mothers, or whether, I'm a lot more than being a brown woman. So as I said, I don't look in the mirror every morning and think, oh, I'm a brown woman. So, and I don't when I go for job interviews or anything like that. So I have made that remark, and I'm conscious that I've made that remark. And perhaps it would have been easier, but I don't know which one would have been easier. And there's certainly a massive effort at the moment for people to bring in more women and other minorities to be brought into broadcasting. I mean, perhaps that's why I'm on the Today programme, because they were wanting more women on, which is no bad thing if that's what, I don't know, I've not asked the editor why he asked me. He knew me from my Newsround days. I just took the job, and I'm trying to do the best I can on it.
Do you feel that becoming a parent has changed your attitude towards the type of work you want to do or how you're viewed in the industry?
Yes, it's been positive in terms of age, actually. So my daughter's clearly aged me, because I don't get those comments as much anymore. I don't get asked for ID at Tesco anymore when I'm buying a bottle of wine either. So it's been positive in terms of people trust you more if you're a mother, whether that's a good or bad thing. There's a certain level of trust. They feel like a certain audience will take you more seriously if you're a mother. So it's been really positive in those respects. But also what it's taught me is that I can't be on call because I'm a mother. So therefore, I can't do what Harry does, which is, I can't just call up on a weekend because I've got childcare issues. So it's had to change. I've had to adjust my schedule a little bit. And that means sometimes saying no to work that I really want to do. You can have it all, girls, boys, everyone. You just can't have it all at the same time. So you've just got to be prepared for sacrifices that on any given day. But that's not to mean you can't have a family and have a great career too. And by the way, the reason my mum told me not to do medicine, one of the reasons, is because she knew I wanted to be a paediatrician or a neonatalist. And she said, it takes you 8 years to study that, and then you'll be doing night shifts at hospitals for the rest of your life. And if you want a family, it's not a great career path. I mean, journalism isn't amazing for that either, but because you do have to be on call a certain amount. And my hours are very irregular. I have to be away for 3 nights a week for Escape to the Country. I have to get up at 3:30 for the Today programme. So it's not exactly sociable hours, but I manage. But yes, it has changed me because, what it's done is reinforced having a mixed portfolio of work, because I just want to be able to do different things. So I want to be able to do the Escape to Country. That's a lifestyle thing, because that's where I am in life at the moment. I'm buying a property, I'm renovating it, so I want to talk about it because that's what I know at the moment, as well as watching football on a Saturday. And so that's why I like this portfolio of work, and that's why I probably won't go back to specialising, because I think a lot of people are quite rounded as well, well-rounded characters. They watch a bit of sport, they might watch a bit of property, might do a bit of this, bit of that, and I kind of want to be able to do that through my work as well, if possible.
BBC Three is said to undergo major changes. I was just wondering what your views are on those changes. how you feel about them, basically.
Oh gosh, can you believe no one's asked me that yet? Even though I have been on BBC Three. I've presented on BBC Three for the Olympics, I guess, but I've never really been what they term a BBC Three presenter. I don't think I'm cool enough. I don't hang out with Talisa, and I don't have 140,000 Twitter followers. 14,000 isn't really enough, I think. I think it does. I can understand why they're doing it. I can understand because it comes down to money at the end of the day, and there isn't enough money. You'll see that with everything. Sports rights, for example, at the BBC, you know, people are working across channels anymore. You know, before it wouldn't be possible for me to work at the BBC and Channel 4, but now no one can guarantee you a job if you're freelance, so you have to work across channels. I can understand why it's happening, but I can understand the frustration as well, because if you are trying to engage your youth, and actually the statistics say while more and more young people, I don't know about you guys where you consume your media, mine is still on a telly, but it's on my planner. So I don't watch, the only live things I watch is sport. I'm not in the BBC 3 age bracket though at the moment. The only live thing I watch is sport. Everything else is on my Sky planner. So it's on demand, but it's still on telly. I don't go onto a computer really to watch. I don't know about you. Hands up, how many of you watch most of your stuff online? So that's quite a lot. So therefore, this unscientific poll shows that it's the right thing to do, doesn't it? Because if you want to watch that BBC Three programme, you'll go online, won't you?
There was just one thing, though. One of the reasons I said is because of being on the BBC Plus One channel, and it doesn't really seem there's much point to that, because like you've got iPlayer now to catch up, and this Radio Plus One channel is a much needed call for it.
Well, maybe it will mean more things move over to BBC. BBC One, you have to remember what BBC One is. It is the shop window for everything else the BBC does. So everyone's aim is to get onto BBC One or Two, depending if it's a more RTO programme, because that is the shop window. So it should be an example of every single thing that you do. But I don't know about you guys, but I don't really care what channel things are on. I don't care if it's on BBC One or, for example, like Young Person's Question Time or versus Question Time. Which one do you watch? Hands up who watches Question Time, and hands up who watches Young Person's Question Time. See, more of you watch Question Time, but Young Person's Question Time is aimed at you guys. But that just shows that it doesn't, then therefore it doesn't, judging by our two unscientific polls, it doesn't really matter that BBC Three is closing down, because you'll go where the programme is, and it doesn't matter where it is. And that's their argument too. Listen, money is an issue, but also someone's got to make the change at some point. So maybe in 5 years, everyone will look back and think, that was a great decision, I don't know. But they don't really have a choice. It's the reality of the industry, I'm afraid.
Generally in the industry, would you say people still champion news on the radio, or are they just more focused on TV nowadays?
I know radio is hugely respected. It's harder, I think, radio. And I think if you look at most broadcasters, they'll always try and do both. So if you look at, for example, someone you guys know well, Gabby Logan, primarily she does TV, but the other day she was doing 5 Live Sport for the very first time. Now, why should someone of her ilk go and do 5? If the thinking was that TV was better, why should she? People don't think like that. It's quite prestigious, sometimes more, to be presenting on the radio. And you know, only the very best broadcasters do it. So, and there are less radio stations out there, aren't there? So in a way, it's harder to get a job in radio than it is telly, because there are countless. You know, you can be a presenter on some random channel on, you know, up in the sort of 800s or whatever on your Sky. You know, you can get a job as a TV presenter a lot easier, I think, than as a radio presenter. I found it harder upon leaving CBBC. And that's why I jumped at the chance of the Today programme, because it meant I could go back to radio, because I was, you know, until I was 26, I'd never even done any telly. It was all about radio, and I only wanted to do radio. My dissertation for my undergraduate broadcast journalism degree was a radio dissertation. And most people wanted to go into telly because they thought it was more glamorous. I was all about radio. So it's kind of where I feel at home, definitely. Did you want to ask?
Following that, I was going to ask if you had to choose to only do one, TV or radio, which would it be?
I wouldn't choose. Don't think you have to nowadays make a choice. I think they are both amazing mediums, and they go, for me, I'm more natural TV and radio rather than print. I find it very hard to write, and I admire anyone who can write. So I do write blogs, and I write when I can, but I find it so hard that I sort of put it off. And yeah, I don't think you need to choose. You can do both, and most broadcasters do try to do both. If you look at a Mark Pugach, for example, 5 Live Sport, ITV Sport, you don't have to choose anymore. It's not that kind of industry, and you guys know, right? You've got to be able to do everything in a way. If you can only do one medium, you're considered probably less of a broadcaster.
I was just going to ask, is the BBC more pro-business than it used to be? Because you said that when you started, it wasn't that good.
Yeah, I just used to, when I started listening to it, not when I was at the World Service, but when you list at domestic news, it used to be quite consumery. So it used to, moan about energy prices. A lot of that is valid. I'm not saying there's not a place for consumer news, but there's also a place for educating the wider public about what business does. The UK banking industry, for example, hires 500,000, I think it employs 500,000 people in this country. So not all bankers are wankers, are they? I mean, all of us are going to have family members who work in the banking industry in some way, whether it be as a teller in the NatWest on your local high street, or a lawyer, or a IT person in a bank, or anything. So it's our job to educate people that actually you've got you've got wankers in every industry, because you've got those kind of people, horrible people, selfish people in every level of society, in every community in society. But that doesn't mean that whole community is bad. And at Tesco's maybe a weird example at the moment because of what's happened in recent months. But at the time, I remember Tesco was contributing 1 out of every £8 to everyone's pension pot. So if Tesco made a profit, everyone was winning, really. So it wasn't a bad thing that Tesco was making a profit. And that's my job as a business journalist, to educate people that it's not as simple as big business bad. It's not a dirty, business used to be, I think, a bit of a dirty word. And I just don't think it is. I just think everyone needs to be held to account, as you all should as journalists. But that doesn't mean that people who work at a big company, they're all bad people. People that work at oil companies, that they're all bad people. Most of you hear a lot about petrol prices. Most of that money is going to the government as tax. Actually, it's not going to the oil company. So people just need to think twice before they just spout out whatever's fashionable to say and find out the facts. And that's what I was really keen on, which is why I went to launch that show, because I was just keen on telling people the truth about business, that actually business is a great thing for the British economy. You just need to hold everyone to account and keep a check on things.
I have one more question, I think. Doing Catherine's job. No? That front of room.
Yeah.
I think that you've covered the royal wedding. How was it like to report on this type of event?
I love big events. I want to be there when everyone's watching, which is why I like Wimbledon. The royal wedding was just unlike anything else in a way. You're sort of... I was outside the Abbey, so you're in a kind of massive bit of scaffolding is the only way to describe it, which has got layers of journalists from all over the world, TV and radio, and you just have to, you get given a position, and that depends on the angle, and you're trying to get yourself in shot with, Kate with her dress on as well, and you're just waiting. It's just unrivaled being part of a big event like that. I did it for CBBC, so that was my last sort of major event for CBBC before I left. And then later on in the day, we were outside Buckingham Palace, and it's just, there's a real buzz from live broadcasting that you don't get elsewhere, and not everyone can do live broadcasting. The only reason I ever became the triathlon presenter is not because I knew more about triathlon than the previous presenter, it's because I knew how to handle myself in a live broadcast. If you can handle yourself in a live broadcast, jobs are more open to you, because it's a real skill, and not many people can do it. And we've all done it. There are mistakes in live broadcasting, and you broadcast your mistakes, and if the wrong people see it, then they judge you for it. So it's a real skill. So that is if you're looking for ways to differentiate yourself, live broadcasting, I would say, is a big way. And also knowing how to do the editing and the kind of doing all the different sides of it. That iPhone thing later on today sounds amazing, because he would have set himself completely apart from other people if he can do everything on an iPhone. So Good on him, Nick Garnett. Thank you very much.
Yeah.